The lights inside the Geneva Summit Hall didn't just shine, they seared. Every bulb overhead seemed brighter than the last, bouncing off marble floors polished to a mirror's edge. Flags of more than 60 nations lined the walls like silent judges. And at the center of it all, the world watched. Cameras from CNN, France 24, and Al Jazeera swept across the room like predators in slow motion. Journalists hunched over notepads. Translators checked their earpieces. Diplomats sat stiff and straight, suits pressed, shoes tapping nervously. This wasn't just another summit. This felt different. Two podiums stood at the front of the room, almost like opposing altars. At the left, a man in a dark green uniform, unmoving Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. He didn't fidget. He didn't perform. He just stood, steady. The flag of his country stitched on his chest. His eyes held no arrogance, only presence. As if to say, I didn't come to impress you. I came to represent something larger than myself. To the right, General Raymond Carter, a towering American figure draped in stars and stripes, decorated, feared, famous for his sharp tongue and sharper smirk. And when he leaned into his microphone, the air itself seemed to tighten. Captain Traoré, he began, his voice cool, clipped. Do you truly believe that a country like Burkina Faso, global influence, limited resources, internal conflict can lead itself without help from powers like us? It wasn't a question. It was a shot. A soft gasp rolled through the room like distant thunder. Pens froze. Eyebrows lifted. A few journalists exchanged glances. This wasn't diplomacy, it was a provocation. And yet, Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he looked directly at General Carter. No glare, no smirk, just a calm, knowing smile. As if this moment had already played out in his mind 100 times before. The moderator clearly cleared his throat. Captain Traoré, your response? The room fell into silence, actual silence. You could hear jackets shift and breathing pause. Traoré stepped forward, his fingers resting gently on the wood of the podium. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't match the general's tone. Instead, he leaned in ever so slightly and said 5 words that cracked the air like thunder slicing through fog. Let me tell you a story. And just like that, everything changed. The cameras seemed to stop breathing. The diplomats leaned in. Reporters set their pens down, because in a room full of strategy, egos, and speeches, Traoré had done something else entirely. He had chosen memory over power, truth over debate. And though no one realized it yet, this was no longer a summit. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Captain Traoré didn't speak like a politician. He spoke like someone remembering something sacred. My grandfather, he began, his voice low but clear, wasn't a soldier. He never wore a uniform. He couldn't read maps or sit in rooms like this. But once he saved an entire village from colonial troops, using nothing but shadows and silence. A ripple moved through the room. Some skeptics raised eyebrows, others leaned in, unsure of what was coming next. But Traoré didn't pause. He didn't need permission to continue. He knew the sound of boots before they touched the ground. He could tell how many men were approaching just by the pattern of their footsteps. He watched where the moonlight hit the forest floor and where it didn't. And when it mattered most, he taught others to vanish with the trees. He paused not for effect, but for reverence. I was just a child, but I remember the way he moved. Quiet, focused. He didn't need applause. He didn't wait for rescue. He just acted. Because the most powerful thing a man can do is protect others without needing to be seen. In the front row, a delegate from Ghana slowly placed a hand over her heart. In the press box, a French journalist stopped typing entirely. The tension in the room had shifted from political to personal. Traoré's eyes scanned the room, not to challenge, but to include. You asked me if Burkina Faso can lead itself, he said softly. I say, we already have. And with that, the air in the room changed again. It wasn't about pride anymore. It was about presents a legacy that didn't come wrapped in aid or power, but in memory and quiet courage. We resisted colonizers barefoot, he continued. We built schools with our hands. We planted fields. We wrote poems. We told stories when the world forgot us. And when droughts came, we shared water. When borders failed us, community held us. We bent, but we never broke. The cameras clicked again, but now with hesitation, like they didn't want to interrupt something sacred. You say we have limited resources, he said. But I say what we have is buried potential. You say we lack influence. I say we have an unshakable spirit. He wasn't raising his voice, but somehow his words struck harder than anything shouted. You call us unstable? We call it rebirth. And for a moment, nobody moved. No one dared speak, because what they were hearing wasn't policy. It was history. It was inheritance. It was the sound of a people finally telling their own story. And Traoré wasn't trying to win a debate. He was trying to wake the room up. Captain Traoré's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word was measured, deliberate, like he was building something, brick by brick, with truth. Our people, he said, are not weak. They are wounded. The line landed with weight, not as blame, but as reality. And the difference, somehow, made all the difference. He paused, allowing the silence to stretch, not for drama, but for honesty to settle. There's a difference, he added softly. And if you can't see that, you're not looking closely enough. Then, for the first time, he turned again to face General Carter. And what he said next didn't shout. It echoed. When something is called help, he said, but arrives with conditions, control, and consequences, what you're offering isn't help. He leaned in slightly. It's a chain. Gasps rippled through the crowd, quiet but sharp. One African Union delegate closed her eyes. Another scribbled something with shaking hands. But Traoré didn't flinch. He wasn't attacking. He was explaining something many in the room had never had to hear or feel. We don't reject friendship, he said. We don't reject cooperation. But respect? That's not something you give with a price tag. It's something you give freely, not at all. He turned to the cameras, not just to the diplomats, but to everyone watching from villages, towns, and city corners around the world. You ask if we can lead ourselves? He said. My grandfather did. My father did. And no, it's my turn. There was no applause. Not yet. Just a heavy stillness. Not empty but full. The kind of silence that fills a room when no one wants to be the first to exhale. At that moment, Captain Traoré wasn't just standing at a podium. He was standing at a crossroads between generations, between what the world thought of Africa and what Africa knew of itself. Behind his uniform wasn't just a soldier. It was memory. It was legacy. It was a promise. One of the moderators shifted awkwardly in his chair. Even the translators had fallen behind, stunned by the rhythm and precision of Traoré's words. And just when it seemed like the moment couldn't stretch further, he dropped one final truth. You call it aid, he said. But when it controls more than it empowers, it's not aid. It's dependency. That line didn't explode. It settled like dust after a long storm. Heavy, real, unavoidable. And for the first time, the world saw not just a man in uniform, but a nation speaking with clarity. Captain Traoré didn't need applause, because when truth is spoken plainly, it doesn't need permission. It just needs to be heard. When Captain Traoré finished speaking, the applause didn't come right away. It wasn't because the room disagreed, it was because they didn't know how to respond. Some things don't need clapping. Some truths deserve silence. But even as the cameras panned across stunned faces and shaken diplomats, Traoré remained still. Because his strength didn't come from reaction, it came from something no one in the room could see. Inside the left pocket of his uniform, Close to his chest was a folded letter. The paper was soft, the edges worn, the ink slightly smudged. It smelled faintly of charcoal and earth. It had traveled hundreds of miles to be there. It was written by a woman named Adama, widow, from a northern village scorched by conflict. She had lost her husband to violence, her sons to hunger, her home to fire. But what she still had was her voice, and she had chosen to send it to him. Captain, the letter read, "We have nothing left but your voice. If you stand tall, we will too. If you speak, we will feel alive again." He had read it 3 times. Once when it arrived, once before boarding the plane, and also right before stepping on stage. He didn't bring it for luck. He brought it for grounding. In a room filled with medals and microphones, Adama's letter reminded him why he was truly there, not to impress the world, but to represent those the world didn't see. He had tucked it beside a faded photo of his father, a man who never made it past primary school, but once told him, "Speak so even the wind remembers you." Later that night, on a quiet balcony above Geneva, the captain's phone rang. Unknown number, Burkina Faso's country code. He answered. A soft voice whispered through the static. "Captain, it's Mariam, from Solhan." He remembered. Her brother, Isufu, had been a schoolteacher, a gentleman who once served him tea before ever mentioning politics. He had died during a wave of violence. Traoré never forgot him. Mariam's voice trembled. "We watched you speak. The whole village. Some people hadn't spoken since the attack. But when you talked, they cried. They clapped." Then she said something he would never forget. "You didn't just speak for Burkina Faso. You spoke for every African child who's ever been told they're nothing." Traoré gripped the railing tighter. Not from pride but from weight. When the call ended, he didn't move. Because sometimes the loudest victories don't come with cheers. They come with whispers. And in that moment, he understood something deeper. He wasn't just carrying letters, he was carrying lives. Back in his private suite above the summit hall, Captain Traoré sat alone. The noise of the world applause, headlines, whispers was far behind him now. In front of him sat a folded envelope. It had been handed to one of his aides 2 days earlier, with one simple instruction from the woman who sent it. Don't let him read it until the second night. The sender? His mother. He opened it carefully, like it was something fragile. The paper was lined, soft at the corners, written in a strong but elegant hand. No flourishes, no politics. Just words from a woman who had raised him with wisdom, far older than any summit in Geneva. "My son," it began, "the land you walk on is not made of gold. It is made of blood, sweat, and stories. Speak for those who were never given a microphone. And if they mock you, walk taller, because your silence will never buy their respect. But your truth might wake their hearts." He paused. His fingers brushed the ink, slowly, reverently, like it was sacred. This wasn't comfort. This was clarity. He remembered being a boy at her feet, listening to stories about his grandfather, about resistance, resilience, and the price of dignity, about how the world may see your skin and expect silence, and about how you must speak anyway. She had never spoken at a conference. She had never been in a room with flags and marble floors. But somehow, her voice had reached it anyway, because it lived inside him. And tonight it had shaken the walls of Geneva. He carefully folded the letter again, the way you fold something too important to ever crease. Then he reached inside his coat and placed it beside another letter. Adama's Brasino. 2 women, 2 letters. One born from blood, one from loss. Both written not to a politician, not to a captain, but to their son. And in that moment, Traoré understood something new. This wasn't about speeches. This wasn't even about leadership. It was about inheritance. Everything he had said came from them, from the women no one saw, from the voices no one asked to speak, From the quiet strength that raised villages, carried pain, and still found the courage to send letters across oceans. He stood, walked to the mirror, and looked at himself, not as a symbol, not as a soldier, but as a son. There were no lights, no cameras, just his reflection, and 2 folded letters in his pocket. And a promise to carry the voices that carried him. Back in his private suite above the summit hall, Captain Traoré sat alone. The noise of the world applause, headlines, whispers was far behind him now. In front of him sat a folded envelope. It had been handed to one of his aides 2 days earlier, with one simple instruction from the woman who sent it. Don't let him read it until the second night. The sender? His mother. He opened it carefully, like it was something fragile. The paper was lined, soft at the corners, written in a strong but elegant hand. No flourishes, no politics. Just words from a woman who had raised him with wisdom, far older than any summit in Geneva. My son, it began, the land you walk on is not made of gold. It is made of blood, sweat, and stories. Speak for those who were never given a microphone. And if they mock you, walk taller because your silence will never buy their respect. But your truth might wake their hearts. He paused. His fingers brushed the ink, slowly, reverently, like it was sacred. This wasn't comfort. This was clarity. He remembered being a boy at her feet, listening to stories about his grandfather, about resistance, resilience, and the price of dignity, about how the world may see your skin and expect silence, and about how you must speak anyway. She had never spoken at a conference. She had never been in a room with flags and marble floors. But somehow, her voice had reached it anyway, because it lived inside him. And tonight it had shaken the walls of Geneva. He carefully folded the letter again, the way you fold something too important to ever crease. Then he reached inside his coat and placed it beside another letter. Adamas Brissino. 2 women, 2 letters. One born from blood, one from loss. Both written not to a politician, not to a captain, but to their son. And in that moment, Traoré understood something new. This wasn't about speeches. This wasn't even about leadership. It was about inheritance. Everything he had said came from them, from the women no one saw, from the voices no one asked to speak, from the quiet strength that raised villages, carried pain, and still found the courage to send letters across oceans. He stood, walked to the mirror, and looked at himself, not as a symbol, not as a soldier, but as a son. There were no lights, no cameras, just his reflection, and 2 folded letters in his pocket. And a promise to carry the voices that carried him. The next morning, the summit resumed with a strange stillness, the kind that only happens when something has already shifted and everyone feels it. The moderator stepped up to the mic. His voice was cautious, calibrated, like someone trying not to touch a bruise. The floor is now open for brief remarks, he said. At first, no one moved. Then, quietly, a hand rose in the 3rd row. It trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. It belonged to Ambassador William Hayes, a retired U.S. diplomat in his late 70s. Most assumed he attended the summit out of formality, a man long past his prime. But now he stood, and the room, almost unconsciously, leaned forward. I wasn't planning to speak, he began. His voice was soft, but there was steel behind it. But I must. The translators froze, almost afraid to misplace a syllable. I was there, Hayes said, the day Thomas Sankara died. The name dropped like a stone into still water. You could hear the breath leave the room. Traoré didn't react, not outwardly, but his hands folded just a little tighter in his lap. Hayes continued. I was a young diplomat, stationed in West Africa. I saw what it meant when a voice full of vision was silenced, and how quickly the world moved on. He looked directly at Captain Traoré. Yesterday, I heard that voice again. In yours. There was no political calculation in his tone. No performance. Just a man remembering the ache of staying silent too long. I stayed quiet back then, he admitted. I won't repeat that mistake. The room held its breath. Then he added, with a steady gaze. You don't owe us explanations, Captain. You owe your people your truth. And yesterday, you gave it. Traoré offered a single, quiet nod of respect. What followed wasn't applause at first. Just stillness. The kind that comes right before a landslide. Then, from the back of the room, a single pair of hands began clapping. Then another. And another. Until the entire summit hall stood. Not for a speech. Not for a vote. But for a man who had turned silence into strength. A crack had formed in the polished walls of protocol, not in policy, but in pride. And through that crack, something older was pouring in. Not rebellion. Not politics. Something even stronger. Recognition. In that moment, Traoré wasn't alone anymore. The dream someone once died for was rising again. And this time it was standing on its own feet. Just as the final applause settled and delegates returned to their seats, a young aide in a navy blazer appeared from the far side of the room. She moved quickly, face pale, eyes locked on one man, Captain Traoré. She whispered something in his ear, and instantly, his posture changed. Not with fear but with urgency. Without a word, he stood and followed her out of the room. The moderator blinked in confusion. Captain, shall we take a recess? But Traoré was already gone. Down a long hallway behind the summit floor, the aide handed him a secure tablet. The screen flashed red. Breaking. Armed conflict reported near Burkina Faso's northern border. Civilians missing. Dozens feared trapped. Traoré stared at the words. He didn't blink, but something behind his eyes changed like a storm gathering behind still water. This, he whispered, is why I came. Not to speak, but to protect. He walked back into the hall. No hesitation in his steps. The moment the room saw his face, the buzz died. He stepped to the podium again. I asked for your attention, he said calmly. Every translator paused. The world leaned in. There has been a new attack near our northern border. Families are in danger. Children are missing. He took a breath, then said, I was invited here to speak, but my duty is not in this room. It's at home. The moderator stammered. Captain Traoré, do you wish to issue a formal statement? But Traoré gently raised a hand. The summit may continue, but I must return to my people. Now. He turned toward the cameras. To the people of Burkina Faso, know this. I see you. I will not let your pain become statistics in someone else's headline. I am coming home. He stepped down from the podium not with drama, but with direction. There was no applause, just silence. Not the awkward kind, but the sacred kind. Because for the first time in the history of the summit, a leader didn't walk away for pride or protest. He walked away for love. His jet lifted off into the Geneva night within hours, and when it touched down before dawn, the red earth of northern Burkina greeted him with dust, smoke, and silence. But at the edge of the landing zone, villagers had gathered. One mother held up a faded photograph, tears carving lines through the dust. She's missing, she cried. Her name is just 12. They took her. Captain Traoré knelt, gently took her hands in his. We will find her, he said. And he meant it. By midday, the captain and his team arrived in the village. What used to be homes were now piles of ash and splintered beams. Smoke still curled from corners. Walls were crumbling. Silence echoed louder than gunfire ever could. This wasn't just destruction. It was absence. Captain Traoré moved with quiet urgency, walking beside soldiers who scanned each broken alley, each blackened doorway. They weren't just looking for signs of life. They were looking for AWA. 12 years old, missing, and the only thing her mother had left. A young sergeant whispered, "Sir, over here." Beneath the wreckage of what looked like a collapsed roof, a pair of tiny feet peeked from the dust. They cleared the debris slowly, carefully, and there curled up, trembling, her skin coated in ash was AWA. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared with eyes wide and hollow, as if sound had abandoned her days ago. But around her wrist was a strip of faded blue fabric, a scarf, torn, smudged, still tied. The kind a mother wraps around her child when she says, "If you ever get lost, wear this. Someone will find you." And someone did. Captain Traoré didn't hesitate. He took off his military jacket insignia and Holland gently wrapped it around her small frame. Not like a uniform, like a shield. As if, in that moment, he wasn't protecting a girl, he was protecting a nation. A local journalist captured the image. No weapons, no soldiers in formation. Just a kneeling captain in the red dust, arms around a silent child, and sunlight breaking behind them. The photo spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was shared across the world. In Ghana, in New York, in Rio, in Paris. People didn't post it with politics. They posted it with one simple phrase: "We see you." Hashtags followed. Number, Blue Scarf Hope. Number, Traoré Undawa. Number, Africa Rising. But the story didn't stop there. In Kentucky, a 13-year-old girl named Grace saw the photo. She didn't know where Burkina Faso was, but she made a tearful video. "I don't know much about politics," she said, "but I want to live in a world where leaders protect little girls, not just talk in rooms." 60 million views. 2 days. When asked later if he saw the video, Captain Traoré smiled. "Tell her," he said. "She has a brother in Africa. And one day, if she ever visits, I'll be the one to welcome her."